I accidentally called her cute, and the alien warrior turned bright red. The arid wind whipped past the entrance to the subterranean complex, carrying dust that tasted of ancient salts and something metallic and strange. Jackson crouched behind a crumbling stone column, his universal translator buzzing faintly in his ear as he tried to make sense of the agitated clicks and hisses, echoing from the chamber ahead. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be charting gravitational anomalies near the sector's fringe, a quiet, solitary job that suited him just fine after everything. But a navigation error, a solar flare, and a crippled engine had sent his scout ship plummeting towards this backwater planet, forcing him to eject and land in what his sensors had optimistically called uninhabited territory. Turns out, uninhabited on this planet meant sacred ground of a fiercely private alien species. And he'd just broken into their basement. A head bathed in the faint, bioluminescent glow of wall-mounted fungi stood the alien, tall, much taller than him, with a slender, almost fragile grace that belied the heavy, segmented armor she wore. Her species lacked obvious external eyes in the human sense, instead possessing complex sensory organs that rippled and shifted across her faceplate like liquid light, constantly scanning. Her skin, visible at her uncovered throat and hands, seemed to absorb and refract the light, changing hue subtly with her mood. Right now it was a deep, agitated violet. She was flanked by two other armored figures, their postures rigid, holding long, staff-like weapons that hummed with contained energy. His translator finally locked onto the dominant frequency, filtering the sounds into rough English. Trespass, defiler of the ancestral thresholds, by the blood oaths. The clicks and hisses were harsh, full of ancient fury. He slowly raised his hands, palms out. Whoa, hold on. Look, this is all just a big misunderstanding. Ship went down. I needed shelter, didn't know anyone was home. The central figure rippled intensely, the light organs flashing a sharp, warning white. Her voice, when it came, was layered, a resonant hum beneath the translated words. Silence. You have breached the sanctity of the deep archive. Your presence is an abomination. Her tone was utterly devoid of warmth, cold and precise as ice shards. She took a step forward, her staff leveling. Prepare for severance. Severance. That sounded bad. Really bad. His military training, buried under years of reckless exploration, screamed at him to fight, flee, do something. But his comms were dead. His sidearm was back in the escape pod wreckage kilometers away. And these guys looked like they ate trespassers for breakfast. He swallowed, trying to project non-threat. Look, I'm just a guy, an explorer. No harm meant. You've got nice glowy things, and your armor is really intricate. His brain helpfully offered a word he should absolutely, under no circumstances, ever use for a towering, heavily armed alien warrior about to execute him. Cute? The air went still. The humming of the staff seemed to dim slightly. The two guards on either side of her froze. The central figure, the warrior priestess, didn't move for a long moment. Then, the light organs on her faceplate, which had been a furious white, began to flicker and change. They didn't just dim or shift hue normally. They cycled through a rapid, chaotic spectrum of color before settling on a startling, uniform, brilliant crimson. It wasn't violet, not white, not the calm blues or greens he'd seen earlier. It was a pulsing, undeniable bright red. The translator offered no explanation, but the raw, visceral reaction was clear. She was blushing? An alien warrior priestess, about to end him, was blushing because he called her cute? What in the nine hells had he just stumbled into? The crimson flush radiating from her faceplate organs deepened, pulsing visibly. The raw, exposed skin of her neck and hands also took on a faint reddish tinge beneath the ambient blue light. Her layered voice, moments ago a blade of ice, now had a tremor beneath it. CQ? The translated word felt foreign, alien to her own vocal apparatus. The two guards flanking her remained frozen, their postures screaming shock, or perhaps horrified embarrassment on her behalf. This wasn't in the ritual protocols. This wasn't in the ancestral scrolls. A trespasser, a defiler, had spoken. That word, to her, A bonded of the deep archive, a scion of the first descent, heir to the judgment rites. Cute? Jackson watched, bewildered, his hands still up. He'd expected plasma fire, dismemberment, maybe even some kind of slow, ritualistic dissolving. He had not expected this. The crimson pulsing intensified, and she actually recoiled a step, a movement that seemed entirely involuntary, born of pure, mortified instinct. Her staff dipped slightly. You are mistaken, she managed, her voice tighter now. The form of a scion of the descent is forged for duty, for command, for the preservation of the archive. Not for such a trivial, meaningless human designation. She sounded genuinely offended, but the blush didn't fade. It clung to her like a second skin of shame, or some other intense emotion he couldn't quite parse. Hey, no offense intended. Jackson scrambled to backtrack, though a mischievous corner of his brain found this utterly fascinating. It's just, you're very striking in the way the light hits your armor and your face thingies. Kinda neat. In a formidable, about to end my existence way, obviously. He risked a small, nervous grin. Not that I'm encouraging the whole ending my existence part, mind you. The redness didn't lessen. If anything, it seemed to bleed into her shoulders, down her exposed arms. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with imminent violence and everything to do with profound social awkwardness. One of the guards beside her made a small, choked sound that the translator rendered as something like a cough, mixed with a sob. The warrior priestess shot him a look that froze him instantly. Your designation holds no weight here, she declared, straightening, trying to regain her icy composure. The crimson flush refused to obey, a stubborn stain on her dignity. Your trespass is a crime against the ancestors. You are subject to the rites of cleansing. Rites of cleansing. Jackson repeated slowly. Does that involve soap? Because I could really use a shower. Been roughing it out there. Her light organs pulsed even faster, the crimson almost vibrating. It involves purification, she stated, the word clipped. And judgment. She finally lowered her staff fully, though she didn't put it away. She gestured sharply with a gauntleted hand towards a side passage. You will come. Your fate will be determined by the archive keepers. Until then, you are under my custody. Scion Cathar commands it. The raw redness persisted, a constant, confusing indicator of her internal state. Custody. Better than severance, he supposed. He pushed himself up, dusting off his worn cargo pants. All right, Cathar, lead the way. Just try not to blush your head off on the walk, okay? Wouldn't want you to overheat. Cathar's form stiffened entirely. The crimson deepened to a near maroon. He had definitely not helped, but she turned sharply and began walking towards the passage, her guards falling in behind her. Jackson hesitated for a second, looking back at the grand forbidden chamber he'd so carelessly entered, then shrugged and followed. Custody with the blushing alien warrior priestess. This was definitely going to be an interesting day. The subterranean passages were vast and complex, carved into the planet's crust millennia ago, lined with intricate carvings and shelves holding ancient glowing artifacts that hummed with faint power. It was clear this place wasn't just a storage unit. It was a library, a temple, maybe both. Cathar walked with rigid precision, her guards maintaining a respectful distance behind her, though Jackson caught them occasionally exchanging glances that conveyed a mixture of awe and bewildered pity for their scion. Cathar's blush had faded slightly, but her light organs still held a residual pinkish hue, a faint echo of the crimson explosion. She hadn't spoken a word since they started moving. Jackson decided to break the silence. So, Sin, Cathar, he began, is that like your title or your name? Back on Earth, Jackson is just my name. No fancy titles, unless you count most likely to crash a spaceship. Cathar stopped abruptly, pivoting to face him. Her light organs, which had settled into a calm, pale blue, flared a sharp amber. My designation is bonded of the deep archive scion of the first descent, Cathar, daughter of Jatelan. These are not mere words, human. They are the fabric of my being, my duty, my lineage. Her tone was formal, severe, attempting to re-establish the power dynamic he'd so rudely disrupted. Your single designation speaks volumes of your unbonded state, your lack of ancestral connection. Yeah, well, we humans are big on individualism, Jackson replied easily, though a flicker of something deeper crossed his face, a reminder of the everything he'd left behind. Ancestors are cool and all, but mine mostly just argued about property lines. Less fabric of being, more old quilts. He paused, though I do have an uncle who makes award-winning barbecue. That's kind of a sacred tradition in my family. Cathar stared at him, her light organs returning to pale blue, though they seemed confused. Award-winning barbecue? The human mind seemed to operate on truly bizarre principles. Duty, lineage, sacred sites, barbecue. The juxtaposition was jarring, illogical. She suppressed a faint ripple of disorientation across her surface. Your customs are opaque, she stated, her voice flat. The bonded of the deep archive served the ancestors by preserving knowledge and overseeing the rites. Your trespass has disrupted the harmony of the lower levels during a critical period. Critical period? What's going on? Jackson asked, suddenly serious. His explorer instincts, the ones that had led him into this mess, kicked in. Curiosity was a hard habit to break. Cathar hesitated. Sharing information with a trespasser was forbidden. But he was under her custody now, a strange, unpredictable factor in an already tense situation. And his reaction to her earlier seemed to suggest a certain unfiltered honesty, however inappropriate. The convergence, she finally stated, the word heavy with significance. The period when the three bloodlines of the deep archive gather for the rites of covenant. Harmony must be absolute. Your presence, disharmonious. Ah, family reunion. Always awkward, Jackson quipped, then sobered. So what are they going to throw me in with the barbecue, uncle? What are these rites of cleansing? Cathar resumed walking, her pace quickening slightly. The rites of cleansing involve the removal of contaminant. In this case, your spiritual and physical presence, must be purged from the sacred levels before the main rites begin. She didn't elaborate on the purged part, and Jackson had a bad feeling it didn't involve disinfectant wipes. However, she continued, her voice regaining some of its formal rigidity. A scion has discretionary authority in unforeseen circumstances. Your status is unique. A human has not set foot here in the memory of the archive keepers. Unique like a rare specimen, or unique like a really persistent fungus? Jackson asked wryly. Cathar ignored the question. The archive keepers will determine if your trespass was malicious or accidental. If deemed malicious, the cleansing is absolute. If accidental, there are alternative rites. Her light organs flickered again, a faint pink returning. But the bloodlines are gathering. The rivals, she trailed off, a tension entering her posture. The rivals will see your presence as a weakness, a disruption caused by my failure to maintain the thresholds. They will seek to exploit it. Rivals? Let me guess. They don't like you, think you're not cut out for the job. Probably have their own version of award-winning barbecue. Jackson guessed, his tone dry but his mind racing. Rival bloodlines, critical period, Secker rights. His accidental trespass seen as a weakness to be exploited. This wasn't just about his survival anymore. He'd stumbled into the middle of something big, something that involved Cathar directly. And judging by her reaction earlier, and the guardedness in her posture now, her position was precarious. He might be a pest to them, but he was a political weapon to her enemies. Suddenly being under her custody felt less like imprisonment and more like unwilling protection. The blushing warrior wasn't just an imposing figure. She was a target, and he was the unwitting projectile. They continued deeper into the labyrinthine complex. The air grew cooler, the silence more profound, broken only by their footsteps, and the faint hum of distant machinery. Cathar led him to a smaller, less ornate chamber, clearly a waiting area rather than a ritual space. It was bare save for a single low platform carved from the same dark stone as the walls. Remain here, Cathar commanded, her voice flat, the pink tinge on her light organs almost entirely gone now, replaced by the cool, collected blue of duty. Her guards took positions flanking the entrance, their staffs held at ease, but their senses clearly alert. "Wait, you're leaving me?" Jackson asked, a flicker of unease going through him. He was alone with silent, armed aliens, who still looked vaguely horrified by his earlier comment. "I must consult with the archive keepers," Cathar stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. "Your status requires formal assessment. Do not attempt to communicate with the bonded. Do not touch the artifacts. Do not stray from this chamber. Do not make inappropriate remarks." The last instruction was delivered with a noticeable stiffness, and for a moment the residual pink flared across her faceplate again before she firmly suppressed it. Jackson held up his hands. "Hey, the cute thing was a one-off." "Probably. Depends on how stressed I get." Cathar didn't respond. She simply turned and strode out of the chamber, her guards closing the entrance behind her, with a soft grinding sound of stone on stone. Jackson was alone. The silence was heavy. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around the Spartan room, trapped in an alien temple, because he'd complimented a warrior. His life had taken some weird turns lately, but this was definitely top 5. He sat on the stone platform, trying to absorb the reality of his situation. He was a piece on a chessboard he didn't understand, surrounded by players who considered him an abomination. Cathar, the stiff, formal, surprisingly blushable scion, was his only link to survival, however precarious. He thought about the flicker of vulnerability he'd seen, the way her dignity had been momentarily shattered by his unintended comment. It was fascinating, and potentially fatal. He needed to figure out what was really going on with these rival bloodlines and this convergence, because his fate seemed tied to Cathar's whether she liked it or not. And right now, judging by the guard's silent disapproval, echoing through the stone walls, she definitely didn't like it. He leaned back against the cool stone, the faint hum of the ancient archive a constant presence. Might as well get comfortable. This was going to be a long wait. Hours passed. The light in the chamber didn't change. A constant, cool blue. The guards outside remained silent, unmoving. Jackson tried pacing, tried sitting, tried mentally recounting every bad decision that had led him here. It was a long list. He thought about home, about the life he'd left behind, the reasons he'd become a reckless explorer in the first place. Running away wasn't much of a plan, but it had kept him distracted. Now distraction wasn't an option. He was entirely at the mercy of an ancient, alien culture and a warrior priestess whose emotional responses seemed to be governed by a spectrum of embarrassing colors. Finally, the door slid open again. Cathar re-entered, her guards remaining outside. She walked with the same rigid posture, but there was a subtle tension in the set of her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Her light organs were a cool, steady blue again, no trace of the earlier crimson or pink. She stood before him, looking down. "The archive keepers have deliberated," she stated, her voice flat and formal. Jackson got to his feet. "And, am I getting the full cleansing, or just a spiritual spot clean?" Cathar's light organs flickered briefly, a faint ripple of something unreadable passing over them. "Your intrusion occurred during the preliminary stages of the convergence rites," she explained, choosing her words with extreme care. "The bloodline of the Stone Heart, rivals to my own, the bloodline of the Deep Archive, have lodged a formal complaint. They claim your presence is a deliberate act of sabotage, orchestrated by my lineage to defile the sacred spaces and undermine the rites." "What? That's insane," Jackson protested. "I just crashed here. I don't even know who these Stone Hearts are." "Intent is secondary to consequence in matters of the archive," Cathar said, her voice gaining a hard edge. "Your presence has disrupted the rites. The Stoneheart bloodline is demanding the absolute cleansing, total elimination of your presence. It would involve processes you would find highly disagreeable." "Highly disagreeable," Jackson repeated, feeling a chill. He pictured some kind of acid bath, or maybe being dissolved into raw energy. "Yeah, disagreeable sounds about right." Cathar continued, her tone growing colder, more focused on the complex political maneuvering behind the scenes. "My lineage, the Deep Archive bonded, cannot simply dismiss their claim without appearing weak. However, the archive keepers recognize the potential Political manipulation in the Stoneheart's accusations. A direct cleansing without proof of malicious intent could destabilize the delicate balance before the rites of covenant. They seek a solution that upholds the sanctity of the archive while mitigating the risk of internal conflict. Here it comes, Jackson thought. The loophole. The alternative rite. Okay, what's the alternative? Cathar was silent for a long moment, her light organs shifting through subtle shades of blue and gray. When she spoke, her voice was lower, carrying a weight of grim inevitability. Under ancient decree, for a trespasser whose intent is deemed non-malicious but whose presence cannot be simply ignored, there exists the rite of binding, a temporary, conditional merging with a bonded scion. It links your resonance to the archive through the scion's own connection until the rites of covenant are complete. It is a way to contain the disruption, making it a part of a recognized structure, rather than an outside defilement. Jackson stared at her. Binding? Merging? What does that even mean? Am I going to be like magically married to you? Because that escalated fast. Cathar's light organs flared instantly, not red this time, but a sharp, agitated purple. It is not marriage, she stated, her voice tight. It is a ritual obligation. A temporary containment. It links your life presence, your chaos, to my own, through the archive systems. It allows the ancestral resonance to filter and neutralize your foreign energies over time, making you tolerable within the sacred spaces. It also places you directly under my authority as the scion responsible for containing the trespass. The Stoneheart bloodline cannot easily attack you if your existence is ritually bound to mine. Containment, authority, and protection from her enemies. It was a political maneuver masked as a sacred rite. Jackson understood politics. He understood being a liability and a pawn. So, he clarified, instead of dissolving me, you're basically putting me on a leash? A very weird magical leash that ties me to you? And it ticks off your rivals because it makes me untouchable to them? Cathar gave a single sharp nod. The purple receded, but her posture remained taut. Approximately, it is a distasteful necessity. For both of us, the rite must be performed before the next phase of the convergence begins. At dawn, it requires, she hesitated, her light organs flickering a shade he couldn't quite identify. Was it apprehension? A certain resonance synchronization. Skin-to-skin contact. Prolonged. Skin-to-skin contact. Prolonged. With the alien warrior priestess, who had blushed crimson when he called her cute, and who was now forced by ancient law to ritually bind herself to him, to avoid being politically undermined. Jackson felt a knot of tension and something else, something unexpected and sharp, tighten in his gut. Right, he said slowly. A binding. At dawn. Skin to skin. So basically, I'm stuck with you until the family reunion is over. And you're stuck with me. Cathar looked away, towards the entrance. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. Yes, human, we are bound by your carelessness and by the necessity of the archive. It is an unwelcome obligation. But as she turned away, Jackson could have sworn he saw a faint, almost imperceptible ripple of the stubborn pink return to the edges of her light organs. An unwelcome obligation that involved prolonged skin-to-skin contact at dawn. This was getting complicated. Cathar didn't leave him alone again. She remained in the chamber, pacing with quiet, restless energy. The guards outside shifted positions. The faint sounds of their armor and the low hum of their weapons, a constant reminder of his captivity and her responsibility. Jackson watched her, trying to decipher her movements, her subtle shifts in light and posture. She was a study in controlled tension, a spring wound impossibly tight. The ritual binding clearly troubled her deeply, far beyond mere inconvenience. It was an affront to her dignity, a burden imposed upon her by circumstance and the maneuvering of her rivals. So, Jackson ventured after a long silence, this rite of binding. What exactly happens? You mentioned resonance sync. Does that mean like brain melding? Are we going to be hearing each other's thoughts? That thought was both terrifying and strangely appealing. What did an alien warrior priestess's mind sound like? Probably very organized, full of ancient rules and judgments. Unlike his, which was currently a chaotic mess of survival instincts, dry humor, and an inappropriate fascination with her blushing habits. Cathar stopped pacing, facing him. Her light organs were back to the cool blue, her expression unreadable. "It is not a full merging," she stated, her voice precise, "not like the rites of covenant, which involve deep ancestral memory transfer. This binding is shallower, a temporary alignment of energetic signatures. Your foreign resonance must be anchored to a native field, mine, to prevent further disruption of the archive systems during the delicate phase of convergence. The skin-to-skin contact facilitates the initial connection. The prolonged contact allows the resonance to stabilize." She paused, then added, her voice lower, "There may be some echo, a faint bleed of sensation, perhaps emotion. But it is not a true merging. Only the bonded may undertake such rites." Echoes of sensation and emotion. Great. So he'd be vaguely picking up on the feelings of a tipping, whose primary emotions seem to be duty, disapproval, and mortification at being called cute. This was going to be fun. Okay. So no full mind meld, he said. A slight disappointment he didn't expect surfacing. Just emotional static, like a bad radio signal, approximately, Cathar confirmed, though her light organs flickered again, a fleeting shade of something. Was that curiosity? The process is complex. It requires stillness, focus. It is overseen by the archive keepers, and it must be completed before the first dawn light touches the upper levels. The temporal window is narrow. Narrow temporal window, forced skin-to-skin bonding with an alien warrior priestess before sunrise. Jackson summarized, running a hand through his hair. Sounds like my average Tuesday, honestly. He saw the faint ripple of purple on her light organs at his attempt at levity, quickly suppressed. Her humor was as rigid as her posture. "There is no humor in this, human," Cathar said sharply. "This is a matter of sacred law, of political survival for my bloodline, and of containment for your disruptive presence." Yeah, I get it," he sighed. "Serious business. My bad. Just trying to lighten the mood. You know, facing ritual bonding with someone who wanted to dissolve me a few hours ago. It's a little tense." She was silent for a long moment, her light organs fixed on him. "Tense?" She repeated the translated word slowly, as if tasting it. "Yes, it is tense." And for the first time since he'd met her, there was a flicker of something in her voice that wasn't pure formality or command. A hint of the raw, exposed feeling that had caused the blush. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual controlled tone. "Rest, human. You will need your energies for the rite. I will remain here." He watched her settle onto the opposite side of the chamber, her back straight against the wall, seemingly entering a state of deep, conscious stillness. Rest? He doubted she would actually sleep. She was on guard, even here, even alone with him. The weight of her duty, her lineage, the political threat from the Stoneheart bloodline. And now, the ignominy of being bound to a clumsy, sarcastic human trespasser. It was a heavy burden. He looked at her, the silent, imposing figure across the room, and for the first time saw past the warrior, past the scion, to the being beneath, a being burdened by ancient laws and modern rivalries, forced into an unthinkable act by circumstances she couldn't control. The unwelcome obligation wasn't just for him. It was deeply, profoundly unwelcome for her too. He lay down on the stone platform, the cold seeping into his bones. Dawn felt like it was both an eternity away and rushing towards them with terrifying speed. As dawn approached, heralded not by external light in the subterranean depths, but by a subtle shift in the ambient bioluminescence and a deeper hum from the archive's core, Cathar rose. Her movements were precise, ritualistic. She instructed Jackson to cleanse himself in a small, recessed pool of cool, mineral-rich water, the purification part of the rites, apparently less disagreeable than he'd feared, though it lacked soap. He emerged feeling cleaner, but no less apprehensive. Two figures, ancient and slow-moving, entered the chamber. The archive keepers. They were smaller than Cathar, their forms encased in intricate, archaic coverings, their light organs muted and slow-pulsing. They spoke in a language the translator struggled with, words heavy with antiquity, but Cathar seemed to understand perfectly. She nodded, knelt, and spoke in response, her voice hushed and respectful. The keepers directed them to a circular platform in the center of the chamber. Markings etched into the stone began to glow softly. Cathar stood opposite him, her armor removed save for minimal coverings at her joints, and a thin, shimmering fabric across her torso and legs. Her skin, now fully visible, held the same light-refracting quality, subtly shifting hues with the faint changes in the archive's hum. It was beautiful, in an utterly alien way. He, by contrast, stood in his damp cargo pants and t-shirt, feeling ridiculously exposed and utterly out of place. "The rite requires contact," Cathar stated, her voice formal, eyes fixed on the glow of the platform. She didn't look at him. "It requires alignment of our core resonances. Place your dominant hand upon mine, bare skin. Your chest against my forearm, my brow against your shoulder." The instructions were clinical, devoid of personal inflection. This was duty, pure, unadulterated duty. Jackson hesitated for a split second, then stepped forward. Her hand was cool and smooth against his. Her skin felt different from human skin, somehow denser, subtly vibrating with a low energy. He placed his hand over hers. She guided his other hand to her arm, settling his chest against the firm muscle of her forearm. Then, with infinite slowness, she leaned her head forward, her brow pressing against his shoulder, just below his neck. The contact was awkward, intimate in its proximity but utterly formal in its execution. He could feel the subtle heat radiating from her skin, the intricate patterns of her light organs pulsing faintly against his shoulder. The archive keepers began a low, resonant The glowing markings on the platform intensified, casting a warm golden light that seemed to ripple across Cathar's skin. He felt a strange sensation begin, a deep, almost painful thrumming within his own chest, echoing the low vibration he felt through her skin. It wasn't just physical. It felt like his very essence was being recognized, probed, then slowly, carefully, linked to hers, an invisible thread being woven between them. Cathar stiffened beside him. Her light organs pulsed rapidly beneath his shoulder, not with color but with intensity. He felt a jolt, a sudden influx of sensation. It wasn't emotion, not clearly defined thoughts, but raw feeling. A deep, abiding sense of responsibility, ancient and heavy. A fierce, protective loyalty to something vast and unseen. And beneath that, a razor-sharp awareness of danger, of eyes watching from the shadows, waiting for her to falter. He was glimpsing the world through her senses, feeling the weight of her world. It was overwhelming, a rush of alien perspective that made his human concerns feel suddenly small and insignificant. He gasped, the air catching in his throat. "Stillness, human," Cathar murmured, her voice a low hum against his shoulder, the translated words barely registering over the rush of alien sensation. "Allow the resonance. Do not fight the binding." He focused on her voice, on the solid reality of her hand beneath his, her form pressed against him. He tried to breathe through the influx of alien perception. Responsibility, loyalty, danger. These were feelings he understood, even if their context was alien. He clung to those anchor points as the merging deep. He felt the archive around them, not just stone and air, but a living, breathing entity of knowledge and power, flowing through Cathar, and now, tentatively, through him. He felt his own chaotic human energy being met by her focused, disciplined resonance, like a wild current hitting a calm, deep river. The binding was taking hold, and in that moment, connected to her through this ancient, bizarre ritual, facing an unknown future tied to hers, the unwanted obligation began to feel less like a punishment and more like destiny. The resonance sync intensified, pulling Jackson deeper into the alien current that flowed through Cathar. He felt not just her core sensations, the weight of duty, the vigilance against threat, but fragmented echoes of her history, fleeting glimpses of moments imprinted on her being through her own bonded rites. He saw, or rather felt, flashes of solemn ceremonies, of vast, empty spaces deep beneath the crust, of faces glowing with ancient light, and woven through it all, a thread of profound solitude, the isolation of someone set apart by their path, their lineage. He also felt, distinctly, the lingering presence of the crimson blush from earlier. It wasn't just a surface resection. It was tied to a deeper core of mortification and a ripple of warmth that was confusing and unwanted within the rigid structure of her being. He felt his own intrusion into her controlled existence, not just as a physical trespasser, but as an energetic anomaly. A chaotic spark dropped into her ordered reality, and he felt how deeply that spark unsettled her, how it resonated with something she kept carefully locked away. Kothar trembled slightly against him. The influx of his own energy, his raw, unfiltered human chaos and emotion, was equally jarring for her. She felt his lingering grief, sharp and sudden, a spike of pain and loss, tied to a past she couldn't access, but could feel echoing in his core. She felt his wry humor, a defense mechanism that felt utterly foreign but oddly grounding. And she felt beneath it all a surprising current of kindness, a tenderness that hadn't been visible in his reckless words or actions, but was undeniable in his resonance. It was like being hit by a wave of warm, turbulent water after spending her entire life in a precisely climate-controlled environment. Her light organs pulsed rapidly beneath his brow, struggling to process the alien sensations flooding her. The archive keeper's chant rose in intensity. The golden light from the platform flared. The connection between Jackson and Cathar snapped into place, like two mismatched pieces of metal fusing under immense pressure. There was a final, powerful thrum, a sense of completion. Then the light dimmed, the chant faded, and the intense resonance settled into a quiet, constant presence beneath their skin. The binding was complete. Cathar slowly pulled away from him, her movements stiff. Her light organs were a deep, calm blue, the only sign of the internal storm she'd weathered, being a faint shimmer that seemed to emanate from her skin. She looked at him, her gaze holding a new, unnerving quality. It wasn't just scrutiny, it was recognition. Recognition of the chaos bound to her, recognition of the unexpected kindness and grief she had felt, echoing within him. "It is done," she stated, her voice low. "The binding is complete. Your resonance is now anchored to mine, and through me to the archive. You are contained, temporarily." Jackson nodded, still feeling the phantom thrumming beneath his skin. Contained. How temporary is temporary? Until the rites of covenant conclude, Cathar replied, which depends on the progress of the convergence and the machinations of the Stoneheart bloodline. They will not abandon their challenge easily, even with this rite performed. So they'll keep trying to stir things up? Jackson asked, his explorer instincts now fully merged with his survival instincts. He was part of this now. He couldn't just be a passive observer. Cathar hesitated, then gave another sharp nod. They will. Your continued presence, even bound to me, is an anomaly they will seek to exploit. They may challenge the validity of the rite. They may seek to provoke you into violating archive law, which would sever the binding and make you subject to absolute cleansing once more. Or they may target me to invalidate the bond. Her voice was flat, but he felt a sudden, sharp spike of alarm echo through their new, subtle substance. The danger was real and immediate. She was worried, for herself and perhaps, just slightly, for the human bound to her. "Okay," Jackson said, the dry humor momentarily gone. "So basically, we have to play by the rules, stay out of trouble, and watch our backs. Because if either of us messes up, we're both screwed?" "Yes, human," Cathar confirmed, her light organs reflecting the gravity of the situation. "We are linked. Our fates, for now, are intertwined. Your survival depends on my adherence to duty and the success of the convergence. My standing and the standing of my bloodline depends on your compliance and the stability of the binding." He looked at her, this tall, formidable, alien warrior priestess, now subtly connected to him by ancient ritual, her internal world momentarily glimpsed, her vulnerability beneath the layers of duty, now a felt reality. She was no longer just his captor. She was his codependent. And he was hers. "All right, Cathar," he said, meeting her gaze. "Looks like we're a team. A really weird, accidentally formed by sacred magic team. Don't worry. I've dealt with awkward partnerships before, usually involved less cosmic bureaucracy." Cathar didn't smile, but the rigid tension in her posture eased just a fraction. She inclined her head slightly. Come, human, you must be housed appropriately while the binding holds, and I must resume my duties overseeing the thresholds. You will remain in proximity, always. As they walked out of the ritual chamber, the archive keepers watching them with their ancient, slow-pulsing light organs, Jackson felt the faint, constant hum of the binding beneath his skin. It was a strange sensation, like an internal compass always pointing towards Cathar. He was bound to her, his chaos contained by her order, his fate now inextricably linked to hers. He had come seeking shelter from a crash landing, and found himself tied to an alien noble in the heart of a political and spiritual maelstrom, all because he'd called her cute. Days blurred into a strange rhythm, dictated by the slow, deliberate progress of the convergence rites and the constant undercurrent of tension from the Stoneheart bloodline. Jackson was given quarters near Kethar's own, Spartan but clean, deep within the archive. He wasn't locked up, but he was never unsupervised. One of Kethar's guards was always present, a silent, watchful presence, their light organs tracking his movements. Cathar herself was constantly busy with her duties, overseeing rituals, consulting with archive keepers, engaging in coded, formal exchanges with representatives of the other bloodlines. Exchanges Jackson's translator rendered as maddeningly polite power plays. Their interactions were brief and formal. Cathar would check on him, issuing instructions in her precise, layered voice. Human, remain within designated zones. Do not engage with members of other bloodlines. Your resonance signature remains stable. Continue to maintain stillness. He tried to engage her in conversation, asking about the archive, the rites, her culture. She answered reluctantly, providing only the most necessary information, always maintaining her formal distance. But the binding was a constant presence. The subtle emotional echo was always there. He could feel her focus, her vigilance, her deep sense of responsibility like a quiet pressure behind his own thoughts. And sometimes, when the tension spiked, or when she dealt with the veiled hostility from the Stoneheart bloodline, he would feel sudden, sharp waves of frustration, anger, or a weary sense of isolation wash over him, not as his own feelings, but as a direct feed from her. It was like living with someone else's emotional soundtrack playing faintly in the background of his mind. And there were other echoes too. Moments when the binding felt softer. When Cathar was alone, seemingly at rest, he would feel a quiet current of contemplation, a sense of deep connection to the ancient knowledge around them that was almost meditative. And sometimes, rarely, fleeting glimpses of that earlier mortification tied to his own presence. A sharp, surprising pang of embarrassment that he felt echoed in his own chest. It was deeply confusing. The Stoneheart bloodline did indeed press their advantage. Rumors filtered down through the bonded network, whispers questioning the validity of a binding performed under duress, speculation that Cathar had deliberately lured the human trespasser to gain a political advantage, accusations that his chaos resonance was actively poisoning the archive's harmony. Cathar addressed these challenges with cold, formal logic in the public forums, but Jackson felt the strain of it through the binding, the constant pressure wearing her down. One cycle, after a particularly fraught exchange he'd witnessed from a distance, Cathar came to his chamber. She dismissed the guard, which was unusual. She didn't look at him directly, instead staring at the intricate carvings on the wall. Her light organs held a deep, turbulent shade of indigo, frustration perhaps, or suppressed fury. The Stoneheart bloodline demands a test of the binding, she stated, her voice low and taut. A trial before the archive keepers and representatives of all bloodlines, to demonstrate its stability and your harmlessness. A test? Jackson asked, getting to his feet. What kind of test? Cathar finally looked at him. Her light organs were intense, radiating the indigo tension he felt echoing in himself. They proposed the resonance of truth, a minor ritual linking our current thoughts to the archive's filters. Any discordance, any deception, any underlying malicious intent would be revealed. It was meant to prove your trespass was accidental, and that my binding is genuine. Sounds reasonable, Jackson said, though the phrase linking our current thoughts made him wary. What if his chaotic thoughts about her, about this whole situation, trip their wires? It is not reasonable, Cathar stated sharply, her voice cracking with suppressed emotion. It is a trap, a test not just of your truthfulness, but of the binding itself, and of my control. The resonance of truth is amplified by emotional proximity. Exposure of her unexpected reactions. Exposure of the unwelcome ripples his presence had caused within her. Exposure of that baffling, mortifying crimson blush. Okay, Jackson said softly, stepping closer. So they're not just testing the binding, they're testing you. Testing how well you've managed my chaos, and how well you've managed your own reactions to it. He met her gaze, letting the understanding filter through the subtle link blink them. They're hoping the cute comment comes back to bite you. Cathar's light organs flared instantly, not indigo this time, but a shattering flash of that familiar, mortified crimson, quickly suppressed by sheer force of will. The indigo returned, deeper, more turbulent. Silence, human, she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, laced with the intensity of her contained panic. Do not speak of that. That was a momentary lapse. An anomaly. Was it? Jackson challenged gently, pushing his luck. Or was it? Because you are bound to me, because you have shown an unwelcome reaction to my presence, an emotional reaction. Cathar closed her light organs briefly, a visible effort at regaining composure. When she opened them, the indigo was still there, but overlaid with a layer of cold, hard resolve. I will face the resonance of truth, she stated, her voice steady once more, though the undercurrent of tension remained. My control is absolute. My duty is paramount. The binding will hold. My mind is disciplined. There will be no discordance. All right, Jackson said. Then I guess we face it together, as a team. The unwillingly bound, politically inconvenient team. He paused, then added, feeling the strange mix of tension and genuine concern their bond had forged. Just try not to think about barbecue during the test. Or, anything else distracting. Cathar looked at him for a long moment, her light organs fixed on his face, a complex interplay of indigo and something else he couldn't read. Then she gave a single sharp nod and, without another word, turned and left the chamber, the guard re-entering behind her. The test was set, and the stakes were higher than ever. Not just for his survival, but for Cathar's standing, her bloodline's power, and the delicate balance of the entire convergence. And somewhere, deep within the invisible link that bound them, he could still feel the faint, stubborn echo of crimson. The chamber for the resonance of truth was different from the binding chamber. Larger, with tiered seating carved into the walls where the archive keepers and the scions of the other bloodlines were gathered. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation and veiled hostility. The representatives of the Stoneheart bloodline, their forms encased in darker, rougher armor than Cathar's lineage, watched them with predatory intensity. Cathar stood tall and rigid beside him, her posture radiating controlled defiance. Her light organs were a cool, steady blue, projecting an image of perfect composure. But Jackson, feeling the subtle resonance between them, felt the deep, almost painful tension coiled within her, the fierce effort required to maintain that facade. The archive keepers, slow and ancient, began the rite. A single large crystal pulsed with soft white light in the center of the platform. They were instructed to place their linked hands over the crystal. Cathar took his hand first, her grip firm and steady, a silent anchor in the storm. He placed his hand over hers, and together they lowered their joined hands onto the crystal's surface. The crystal flared, brighter this time, the light seeming to penetrate their joined hands, flowing up their arms, connecting their resonance signatures to the archive's ancient filters. The air thrummed with power. Jackson felt the connection to Cathar deepen, becoming sharper, clearer than during the initial binding. He felt her focus, absolute and unwavering, her mind a fortress of duty and control. He mirrored her stillness, clearing his mind as best he could, focusing only on the present, on the shared weight of their hands on the crystal, on the steady presence of Cathar beside him. But the Stoneheart scion, a large, imposing figure named Cathar, broke the ritual silence. Scion Cathar, his voice boomed, amplified by some unknown technology. Your control is commendable, But control does not erase the initial defilement. Speak, human trespasser. State your intent upon entering the archive. Do not lie. The resonance will reveal it. The question was directed at Jackson, but the focus of the test was clearly on Cathar. Could she maintain her composure, her discipline, while their resonance was amplified? Could she prevent her own turbulent reactions to his presence from causing discordance in the binding? Jackson took a slow breath. He felt Cathar's tension spike beside him, a sharp wave of pure dread. He had to answer truthfully, but he also had to be careful. Careful not to think anything that would shatter her carefully constructed facade. I landed here because my ship crashed, Jackson stated clearly, his voice steady. Accidentally. I entered the archive seeking shelter. I had no knowledge of its sacred nature or its inhabitants. He spoke the truth, simple, unvarnished. He felt the resonance, except the statement a low hum of affirmation. And your initial words to Siam Cathar. Cathar pressed, his voice dripping with malice. Your declaration that she was cute? Was that an attempt at mockery? At deliberate provocation? The air crackled with tension. Cathar's entire form stiffened. Through the binding, Jackson felt a tsunami of emotion hit her. Mortification, shame, fury, and something deeper. A raw exposure that terrified her. Her discipline was failing. The resonance began to waver, the steady hum showing faint signs of discordance. This was it. The trap. Jackson had to act. He couldn't let her break. He couldn't let them use his stupid comment to destroy her. He focused his thoughts, not on the present danger, but on the feeling he'd had when he first saw her, the unexpected sense of beauty in her alienness, the raw power beneath her graceful form, and yes, the surprising, confusing flicker of something that felt appealing in the face of utter isolation. He focused on the feeling that had prompted the word, the genuine, if ill-advised aesthetic appreciation that had slipped out, and he focused on the feeling he had now, the fierce, protective instinct that had risen within him for this woman he barely knew but was now bound to. It wasn't mockery, Jackson said, his voice low but carrying through the chamber. He looked directly at Cathar, ignoring the watching keepers and the sneering stone-hard scion. It was a genuine reaction to something I found striking, unexpected, beautiful in a way I hadn't encountered before. He let the raw honesty flow through the binding. Unfiltered, my language is clumsy, but the feeling was real. I found her remarkable. And yes, in my limited human way. I found her cute. And seeing her react like that, she risked a small, genuine smile, letting the warmth reach his eyes. It was endearing. He poured all the confusion, the unexpectedness, the strange fascination and protective tenderness he felt for her into the binding, flooding the link with his raw human sincerity. It was a gamble. It might shatter the binding completely, his chaotic sincerity too much for her control. Or it might resonate. For a terrifying second, the resonance screamed with discordance, a high-pitched whine of conflicting energies. Cathar cried out softly, a sound of pure agony and overwhelm. Her light organs flashed wildly, cycling through a kaleidoscope of colors, raw, uncontrolled. Then, just as suddenly, the discordance cut off. The whine faded. The wild flashing stopped. Cathar's light organs settled, not on blue, not on indigo, but on a deep luminous gold. It wasn't a color he'd seen before. It pulsed with a calm, powerful light that felt pure. And through the binding, Jackson felt it too. Not discordance, but a sudden profound resonance. Her own core, stripped bare of ritual and control by his unfiltered honesty, had met his. The gold light flowed from her, through their joined hands, into the crystal, into the archive itself. The archive keepers stirred, murmuring in their ancient tongue. Cathar of the stone-hard bloodline stared, his faceplate light frozen in a pattern of disbelief and fury. The resonance of truth, amplified by their unexpected, raw connection, had not revealed deception or discordance. It had revealed a genuine, if bizarre, bond, and in doing so, it had validated the binding, not as a political maneuver or a failed containment, but as something real, something that resonated with the archive's own ancient truths. Cathar, had not failed the test of control. Her true self, revealed by his honesty and the pressure of the moment, had somehow passed it, forging a connection deeper than mere duty. Katsar lifted her head. The golden light emanating from her was mesmerizing. Her voice, when she spoke, was different. Still sallow, still resonant, but with a depth, a warmth he hadn't heard before. The resonance confirms, she stated, her voice clear and strong, resonating with the archive's hum. The human's intent was accidental. The binding is stable. His presence is contained by the will of the archive and by the truth of our connection. She looked at Jackson, her golden light organs fixed on him, and for the first time, he saw not just duty or control, but a flicker of something else entirely. And something that looked suspiciously like hesitant wonder. They had survived the test, but the nature of their binding and their relationship had just changed forever. The aftermath of the resonance of truth was swift and decisive. The archive keepers, their ancient light organs pulsing with quiet approval, declared the binding valid. The Stoneheart Bloodlines challenge was formally dismissed, their accusations of sabotage undone by the unexpected outcome of the test. Humiliated, Kataran and his retinue withdrew, their light organs radiating dark, cold frustration that Jackson could still faintly feel echoing through the binding, like distant thunder. Kathir remained on the platform, the luminous gold still pulsing from her light organs. The shift in her was palpable. The rigid control was still there, but it was overlaid with a new fluidity, a quiet confidence that hadn't been present before. The external pressure had forced an internal change. His chaotic sincerity, meant to protect her from political ruin, had inadvertently unlocked something within her, something deeper than duty. When the chamber cleared, leaving only Kathar, Jackson, and her two loyal guards, the silence was different, heavy with unspoken implications. Kathar finally stepped down from the platform, her movements still precise, but with a subtle grace that captivated him. She stopped before him, her golden light washing over his face. "You did not lie," she stated, her voice still carrying that new resonance. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, delivered with a hint of wonder. "Your thoughts were unexposed by the resonance. Your feelings about my form, your appreciation. It was not mockery." Jackson swallowed. "No, it wasn't mockery. It was just me being an idiot with my words." But the feeling was real. Kethar's golden light pulsed, seeming to consider this. "Endearing," she repeated the translated word he'd used. A human designation for something that causes a feeling of warmth, of unexpected favor. She looked down at their joined hands, still loosely held above the crystal, then slowly, deliberately tightened her grip on his. "I felt it, human, through the binding. Your sincerity, it was overwhelming, and not unwelcome." Not unwelcome. Coming from Kathar, that was a monumental statement. It wasn't a declaration of affection, not by a long shot, but it was a recognition, a tentative acceptance of the unexpected connection forged between them. "Kathar," Jackson said softly, using her name without her title this time. He felt the subtle flicker through their link, a jolt of surprise, quickly followed by that familiar, baffling warmth. "We're bound now. Properly bound." "What does that mean? Not just for the rights, but for us?" Kathar released his hand, stepping back slightly, though the golden light from her remained focused on him. The professional distance reasserted itself, but it felt different now, less like a wall and more like a threshold. "The binding is contingent upon the completion of the convergence rites," she stated, returning to a more formal tone, though the underlying golden resonance in her voice persisted. "Once the rites of covenant are concluded, the necessity for your presence within the archive will diminish. The binding may dissolve naturally, or it may require a formal severing rite." A formal severing rite. The thought sent a strange pang through Jackson. Dissolve? Be severed? After everything they'd just been through? After the terrifying intimacy of the binding and the resonance of truth? But the resonance, it felt like more than just containment, he ventured. It felt like a real connection, acknowledged by your own archive. Kathar was silent for a long moment, Her golden light softened, becoming more diffused, less intense. The archive recognizes deep resonance, she finally said, her voice low. It validates truth. Your sincerity resonated with something within me. Something that was obscured by duty, by expectation. Your chaos brought it to the surface. She looked away towards the entrance of the chamber. The convergence rites continue. My duties are pressing. The Stoneheart bloodline is defeated in this challenge. But they will seek other avenues of disruption. We must remain vigilant. She was deflecting, retreating back behind the shield of duty. But the golden light, the softer voice, the acknowledgement of his sincerity and its effect on her, it was all still there. The rigid shell had cracked, and he had glimpsed the luminous core beneath. Qatar, he said again, stepping closer, ignoring the presence of the guards. What if the binding doesn't dissolve? What if we don't want it to? She pivoted to face him, her golden light flaring slightly with surprise. That is not a contingency accounted for in the rites, she stated, her voice regaining some of its earlier formality, though it was colored with something new. The binding is a temporary measure, an unwelcome obligation, for containment. Maybe it was, Jackson countered, standing his ground. But maybe it became something else. Because of the resonance. Because we faced it together. Because the truth. He reached out, stopping himself just short of touching her. The temptation was immense. Feel that connection again, not just through the subtle hum of the binding, but through conscious contact. Qatar stood perfectly still, her golden light meeting his gaze. He could feel her internal struggle through the binding, the pull of ancient duty, the weight of expectation, warring with the undeniable resonance they had shared. The rights of covenant are paramount, she said, her voice tight. My focus must be absolute. We will speak of this. Corners after the convergence. If the binding persists, it was a dismissal, a postponement. But it wasn't a rejection. It was a door left slightly ajar. The unwelcome obligation had perhaps, just maybe, become something else entirely. The final phases of the convergence rites were upon them. The subterranean complex thrummed with heightened energy. Representatives from all three bloodlines were constantly moving through the main chambers, participating in elaborate ceremonies and solemn assemblies. The tension, though less overtly hostile after the Stoneheart bloodline's failed challenge, was still thick in the air. Jackson felt it keenly through the binding. Cathar's relentless focus, her exhaustion, the constant vigilance required to navigate the complex social and political landscape. He was permitted to observe some of the lesser rites, always under guard, always in proximity to Cathar or her direct representatives. He learned more about their culture, the deep reverence for the ancestors, the intricate web of bloodline obligations, the way resonance and emotional control were woven into every aspect of their lives. He saw Cathar in her element, a figure of authority and grace, moving through ancient rituals with a quiet power that captivated him. The golden light from her light organs had become her constant state since the resonance of truth, visible sign of the shift within her. Their private interactions remained limited, constrained by her duties and the ever-present guards. But the binding was a constant, silent conversation. He felt her weariness, her moments of doubt, her unwavering determination, and she felt his presence, a steady, grounding anchor in the storm of her obligations, a quiet current of something she couldn't define, but felt undeniably present. One cycle, late in the deep night, after a particularly grueling series of rites, Cathar came to his chamber alone. She dismissed the guard with a gesture, her movements slow with fatigue. The golden light from her was muted, soft. She didn't speak immediately, simply stood in the center of the room, her gaze distant. Jackson got up from his platform. Long day? He asked softly. Cathar turned to him, her light organs meeting his gaze. The rites of covenant are near their conclusion, she stated, her voice low and tired. The three bloodlines will enter the Nexus chamber tomorrow. The final communion with the archive will take place. And the convergence will be complete. And the binding? He asked, his voice equally quiet. Cathar was silent for a long moment. Through the binding, he felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Duty, uncertainty, a deep, yearning exhaustion. I consulted with the archive keepers, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. They state the binding has resonated with the core harmonies of the archive. It is unusually stable. They believe it will not dissolve naturally after the convergence. A thrill went through Jackson. It wouldn't dissolve. It was real. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. What does that mean? For us? Cathar looked up at him, her golden light organs searching his face. It means the unwelcome obligation, too, has become something else, she admitted, the words heavy with significance. It means we are linked, beyond ritual necessity, by the truth of our resonance. She reached out a hand slowly, tentatively, not to bind, not to command, but to touch. Her fingers brushed his arm, sending a jolt of energy through him. The subtle hum of the binding intensified, becoming a warm, powerful current flowing between them. Cathar, he breathed, covering her hand with his own. Her skin felt cool and smooth, yet vibrant with hidden life. My duties, my lineage, they are my life, she said, her voice thick with emotion he felt echoing in his own chest. But you're present, and it has revealed a part of me I did not know existed. A part that resonates with your chaos, your sincerity. She looked at their joined hands, the golden light from her seeming to weave into the flesh of his own. The keepers say a formal severing rite is possible, but the archive's harmonies indicate it would cause significant discordance, an imbalance, an imbalance. Jackson repeated, tightening his grip on her hand, because the binding isn't just on the surface anymore. It's part of us, part of the archive itself. He saw the truth of it in her golden eyes, felt it in the powerful connection between them. She confirmed, her voice a soft admission. It is part of us. She looked up at him again, her gaze unwavering. My path was set, strict, defined by duty. But now, there is a new variable. You bound to me by chance, then by ritual, and now by something deeper. Something the archive acknowledges. He pulled her gently closer, not forcing, just offering the space. She came willingly, closing the small distance between them. They stood in the quiet chamber. The only light the soft gold from her. The only sound their quiet breathing and the faint, constant hum of the archive, which now felt like a living witness to their connection. The unwelcome obligation, the political necessity, the accidental trespass, it had all led here, to this moment, to them. What do we do now? Jackson asked, his voice barely a whisper. Cathar leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of vulnerability he would never have imagined seeing days ago. He wrapped an arm gently around her, pulling her fully into his embrace. The golden light of her being seemed to encompass him, wrapping them both in a warm, resonant glow. Through the binding, he felt her relief, her exhaustion, and something new, a hesitant hope. We face the dawn, Cathar murmured, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Together, and we discover what this new path is. The binding is permanent, human. We are bound. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him again. The archive keepers also spoke of mutual guardianship, of two unique resonances intertwined, strengthening the archive, not disrupting it. If the bond is accepted, if the bonded accepts it, she was asking him, not with words, not with ritual, but with the raw emotion radiating from her, flowing through the golden light of her being, amplified by the permanent link between them. Did he accept this bond, this strange, complicated, deeply unwelcome obligation that had transformed into something profound and unexpected? Jackson didn't hesitate. He looked into her golden light organ eyes, felt the deep, unwavering connection that now existed between them, acknowledged by her ancient culture, forged in shared danger and revealed truth. I accept it, Cathar, he said, his voice firm. I accept you, all of it. Cathar's light organs pulsed with a brilliant, joyful gold. She reached up, her hands framing his face, her touch warm and vibrant against his skin. Then we are bound, she declared, her voice ringing with a newfound certainty. Truly bound. And then, with a grace that stole his breath, she leaned in and pressed her brow against his once more, not in ritual necessity this time, but in a deliberate, intimate gesture of connection. The binding surged between them, a powerful current of shared energy, shared pasts, shared futures. The chaos and the order, the human and the alien intertwined, becoming something new, something stronger, acknowledged by the ancient heart of the archive. The rites of covenant would conclude. The convergence would pass. The Stoneheart bloodline would scheme from the shadows. But Cathar and Jackson, bound by chance, transformed by resonance, would face it all together. Their story had just begun.